All right, friends, welcome to lesson number 2. This is swatching. We are going to really learn what our colors look like, a little bit of practice with our brush, and our different ways of kind of cataloging the colors we have. I'm going to show you both Stampin' Up! Colors as well as our paint set, and then I'll even do a bonus video showing one of the fancier sets of paints that are out there, and I'll talk my way through all of that. So you're going to need a few supplies to start with. You're going to need, for this, some watercolor paper off of your pad. And we're going to probably want to trim this down a little bit to fit in our watercolor palette. So in our case, what I love being able to do is create a piece of paper that is roughly the same size as my paints. That way I can reference them and they're going to match up to the size of my palette. So it's easy to make sure I'm using the color that I see in my palette. Okay. And by the way, I think I flipped my palette around, but from what yours is going to look like. Okay. So what I want to do is cut my paper to be basically 9 inches by 3 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so we're going to cut that, and I think this paper is 9 inches, so that just works out. All right, so there's our paper, and you can see it is going to fit in here and close. All right, which is what we want. All right. Now, in my palette, I've got 4 rows of colors, and similarly, we have 4 color families in our Stampin' Up! Colors. So you could actually do a couple of these. I'm going to show you another way of doing it in your sketchbook too. So it's all up to you and personal preference. And by the way, you will come to discover that swatching is something you do on a relatively regular basis, and we're going to do it in lots of other things as well. Okay, so I've got my sheet here, and what I want to do is just put in some light pencil lines to help me keep my swatching nice and even. All right, so this is 3 3/4, so it's not quite 4 inches. So I'm going to start down 1/4 of an inch. That just gives me a little space, and then I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch lines. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Okay, with my pencil, and I will just mark that again over here so I can get straight lines. So I went down 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to do 3/4 markings down the line. Okay, and then I'm going to connect the dots, so to speak. All right, now you'll notice I'm using a drafting ruler. I've got a link to the one that I use in Amazon, or the one that I'm using from Amazon. So you can get one of these too. Here's why I like this, is the ruler itself is 1 inch. So like I could go the top and the bottom of this, and it's 1 inch, which is a really handy measurement. It's also really easy to hold onto because it's 3-dimensional, and it's also easy to find because you don't lose it as easily. Those are just some of my reasons. Okay, now this is, now I left a little bit of a gap, so I'm going to call this my, well, mine is called the Gen Arts. Yours might have a different name, but it's the same exact paint. My pencil's about out of lead. Let's see if I can keep this going. Okay. I also want to divide this kind of in half, and then each of those halves in half. Okay, so we've got 9 inches. So half of that is 4.5. And then half of each 4.5 is 2.25, right? So we've got 1, 2.25. Now what this line is going to give me is each section is going to hold 4 colors. And then I can just do half and half. Oh, let me grab another pencil. Okay. Now you might be wondering, why on earth am I spending all this time on swatching my colors? Because it seems like, you know, is it really that important? And the answer is, I will refer to this swatch chart every time I use these paints. And so it is helpful. Okay, so now when I look at my paints, there's 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I've got 4 sections on here. And then I spoke incorrectly. I said there was 2. There's actually 3. But it helps me. I can evenly divide 3 swatches of colors in here so much easier than I could evenly distribute 3, 6, 9, 12 colors across one strip. So it really helps make it nice and even. Again, I really like knowing that the color that I have on here is the color that I'm going to see. Now, I also like to use my colors like this. By the way, there's like a little tray that fits in yours. I took mine out and threw it away. I don't like it. Okay, and I'm also going to use it like this. So I can use this as a palette to mix colors in. I cleaned mine out, so it looks pretty clean right now. And then I can literally take my swatch chart and kind of tuck it in right here. So I'll be able to see. Okay. So here is the one I already have done up. It's not as perfect as the one we're about to do, but it's close. So whenever I stick this in, I can see exactly what each of these colors look like, because some of these get to looking very similar. And so this just helps. Now, whenever I'm going to do something like this, I like to take my spritzer. And one of these I'm going to use with water, and then the other one, because you've got 2, the other one we're going to put rubbing alcohol in. Okay, so I'm just going to spritz these. And what that does is it activates the paint. Okay, then I will also tell you is you might use the water pretty quickly through this. You can refill it with your pipette if you have got clean water. Only clean water goes in there though. I also have 2 jars, and this activity is going to show you the power in having 2 jars of water. So I'll try and keep them kind of in the picture frame a little bit. I'll move them out just a skosh. Okay, so now let's start swatching. Again, we're going to do this several times throughout our class. Now I'm using the number 9 brush, which is kind of just a middle of the road size brush. I want my first jar of water here to be my quote dirty water, and then my second jar is going to be my clean water. So I'm always going to rinse in here first, and then once the water starts getting dirty, if it's not cleaning up enough, then I can rinse it in my quote clean water. You'll see how this is really helpful. Okay, now let's just swatch. So I'm just going to swirl my paintbrush into the paint. Okay, and you can put it on here if you want. When I'm swatching, I don't often do that just because I can do it pretty quickly. Okay, so I'm going with a fairly rectangular or square shape of my first color, and I've got it. I'm going to rinse my brush off, and since this is clean, I don't need to rinse again. I'm going to pick up the next color on my palette, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and I'm going to leave a teensy bit of white between those 2 colors. Okay, so a little teeny bit of white between them so that the 2 colors don't run together. Okay, I'm going to rinse my brush off and kind of get rid of that excess water and continue down the line. And here's my 3rd color. Okay, now my line helps me figure out that I'm moving on to the next section, and so on. And then I'm going to speed this process up for you. Okay, here we go. We've got all of our colors swatched. A couple of notes. You can see, I kind of pointed this out in the video, but these two colors bled together. That's because the white space around them connected, and water will flow to water. So that happened, and I stopped it by using my my towel here, or a paper towel actually works a little better, and just kind of broke the barrier between so that they wouldn't connect and the water wouldn't connect between them. It's happening just a teeny bit here and a teeny bit here. This one is up here is still kind of wet, so I can get rid of it a little bit. You can use your brush to clean this up a little as well. We'll talk a little more about that process later on, but for now I'm just going to leave it. Okay, so there we go. Those are our colors. I just drug my color through there a little bit. Okay, now we want to set this aside and let it dry completely. All right, next up, let's do the Stampin' Up! Colors. Okay, notice my water here. While this might look dirty, it's actually still pretty clean, and this is very clean, and that's just what we want. All right, next up, I want to do some Stampin' Up! Colors. If you took my watercolor stamp camp #1, we swatched all the colors. I'm going to swatch, actually, I'm going to grab one slightly larger block. I'm going to swatch my in colors. These were the colors we did not have last year when I did my watercolor stamp camp. So let's do those. We've got Sweet Sorbet, Parakeet Party, Tahitian Tide, Orchid Oasis, and Starry Sky. Now, there's a couple differences between our ink and our ink pad, like our refills and our ink pads. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the difference. Now, these ones, because I don't really have a palette like this of paint, I'm going to do this actually in my sketchbook. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is open up my sketchbook, and we're going to swatch these colors. Okay, now what I love doing in my sketchbook, and you can do this with a pen or a pencil, is writing information in here. Your sketchbook is not necessarily just a book of pretty pictures. It's like an artistic journal, really. So I'm going to put today's date, which I'm shooting this on 4/12/23, and I'm going to do the SU in colors 22 to 24. And then the first round is going to be from the refills. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just dab just a teensy bit onto a clear block. I like using the clear block just because it's something we already have readily available to us. You can buy palettes and stuff, but I like using some of the things that I already have. I'm just putting like a drop-ish, maybe a little more than that, on here of each color. And then I'm going to continue just like I've been doing. I'm going to start with a nice clean brush, and then I'm going to pick up some of this color, and I want to swirl it around a little bit with my water that's in my brush. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of paint a similar swatch. I'm going to do it just a little bigger in here. Okay, clean my brush and rinse in the clean water. Okay, repeat that process with the next color. Okay, clean. Now, what is the difference between paint and ink? Well, there are different composition. There's different ingredients that make each of these up. Paint is going to be made of pigment, a binder agent, something that will help it stick to your cardstock, or paper, I should say, watercolor paper. And then kind of depending on the brand, there might be other additives included. Some watercolor paint literally has honey in it. And the honey makes the look of the paint a little different. It's very kind of an interesting quality. Our ink, I don't know exactly what's in it, but it is designed to work well, inking up a rubber image and then stamping it onto cardstock. It is not designed for watercoloring. Now we can do that with it, but it's not designed for that. So just keep that in mind. Now I also want to swatch these colors from ink pad lid. And I put lid in parentheses because what I want to do is squeeze the ink to my pad and then pick up that color. Now, if you can't squeeze your ink pads to the lid, like you don't have the hand strength, just do it with a block of ink, pick up the color and then pull it off of here. It's the same thing. Now, the difference is that you're going to get a different concentration of ink when you do it this way. Okay, and this might not show up terribly well here with every single color, but over time it definitely will. All right, so we'll do Parakeet Party next. You can already see this one's a little bit lighter. And like I said, kind of depending on each color. Oops, I keep going into my clean water, darn. Oops. Oh my gosh, we've never squeezed this ink pad to the lid. She's new. There we go. Next we'll do Orchid. So generally speaking, when we use our re-inkers, we have a much higher concentration of ink in the ink we're putting down, okay? Like this, I knew I had re-inker in here, so I must have dripped a re-inker in. All right, so you can see these are each a little bit lighter. All right, one thing to note, do not ever leave your paintbrush in the water, okay? So like you probably have seen somebody do that. A couple reasons why. One, it's gonna smoosh the point of your brush point, and we don't want that to happen. Two, it's also going to loosen the hairs in this thing is called the ferrule, or furl, I think actually is how you pronounce it. And you don't want that. You want to keep your brush nice for a long time. So what I like to do is just let it dry on my towel, or you can use your brush rest, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You have one if you ordered your box of supplies from me. You've got a brush rest. Okay, so here's what I see when I look at these two. They're very similar. These colors are a little bit more rich, which is both good and bad. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. These ones look a little bit more watery or a little bit more transparent. And again, depending on what you want to do, you'll get different looks. So what I would encourage you to do is to literally swatch out every single color of ink that you have. You can see this is one I did last year, and I kind of laugh at this because I did these big, long, skinny stripes. And while that's nice, it's not very practical or useful. It's so much easier in these smaller sections because it's so big. This is such a big piece of paper to have laying around. So I like doing them over, you could do maybe 2 sets of colors per sheet. You can do them from the refills and from the ink pad lid if you want, or I would actually just do them from the lids of the ink because it's just a little easier. Again, you can tap your block onto the ink pad lid if you need, if you don't have the arms or the strength in your hands to squeeze those lids. Now, the last thing I want to mention about this exercise is, while you might feel like this is one to overlook, I highly encourage you not to. Swatching is such a good way to get a feel for how much water you might use, how much ink or paint you might use, and the the different ratios of ink and or paint to the water really kind of affect what they look like. You can also see how things dry. So as I'm looking at my chart that I made up here, I can see where it's kind of wet. There's this little edge, and these are called blooms. And so the more water you have, it kind of can lighten up the area. And sometimes I actually reapply the paint just because I had too much water in some of the areas on my swatch, and I want to make sure it's a true representation of the color so that when I go to use it, it comes out looking the way I think it's going to. The other thing that you can do is just refer back to these. When you're trying to determine what colors might look good together, what colors look like, because sometimes the ink looks different than you might envision it. For instance, the ink versus the cardstock. Blushing Bride. I think we can all agree to that one, right? So this is just a really helpful exercise to get you familiar with your supplies so that when you go to paint something specific, you know how it's going to act. Okay, check out the next video, and I'm going to show you some more artist quality paint. Okay.